Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the previous session, we were discussing the story of Talut and Jalut, and in specific, we were seeing how Allah was continuously providing examples to the Muslims to encourage them to fight in the cause of Allah, to not fall in love with dunya, to not fall in love with their life to the extent that they don't want to sacrifice it in the cause of Allah, which was the primary problem of the previous ummah. And we also saw that just as Allah was ending his discussion on the covenant and on the Sharia, he again reminds the Muslims in the same way that he reminded the previous ummah that save yourself before a day comes where no friendship will benefit, nor will intercession benefit, nor will exchange be accepted. Continuing now with this discussion in verse 255, we have the beautiful throne verse or Ayat al-Kursi, where Allah says, Allah, there is no God except Him, the ever-living, the sustainer of all existence. Neither drowsiness overtakes Him nor sleep. To Him belongs whatever is in the heavens and whatever is on the earth. Who is it that can intercede with Him except by His permission? He knows what is presently before them and what will be after them, and they encompass not a thing of His knowledge except for what He wills. His kursi, or His throne, extends over the heavens and the earth, and their preservation tires Him not. And He is the Most High, the Most Great. So this is the famous Ayat al-Kursi which is now appearing, and again its placement in this surah just before the Battle of Badr is worth reflecting on. Muslims in Medina had to battle with not only their fears but also the constant arguments by the Jews and the hypocrites aimed at weakening their iman, raising doubts, causing confusion amongst the Muslims. With so many challenges, Allah sent several verses to remind them of wars fought in the past by the believers, such as the battle between Talut and Jalut, encouraging them to focus on the akhirah instead of chasing the comfort of this world. However, besides examples of wars in the past, besides all these verses where Allah was constantly trying to motivate and encourage them, there was a need to emphasize the power and capability of Allah. Of course, Allah had already been introduced to them in Makkah, but being Arabs who had spent decades in the period of Jahiliyat worshipping hundreds of different idols, there was still a lot about Allah that the Muslims needed to know, and the Ayat al-Kursi was perfect for this purpose. So the Ayat al-Kursi starts with an emphasis on two main qualities of Allah. In Surah Fatiha, the two qualities Allah focused on was Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, because when Fatiha was being revealed, there was a need to stress on Allah's infinite mercy. When Ayat al-Kursi was being revealed, there was a need to stress on Allah's unlimited power, strength, hikmat, knowledge, and capabilities to encourage Muslims to fight in the cause of Allah without fearing the enemy. Just knowing that Allah's by your side, that should be enough to give you all the courage that you need. So in Ayat al-Kursi, Allah starts off by saying Al-Hayy. Al-Hayy suggests that not only is God the one that gives life, but He also has achieved perfection in life. Perfection stems from the fact that He has always existed and He will always continue to exist, but He does not need any food, drink, sleep, or rest for survival. His life is perfect in the sense that it is infinite, without any dependencies that otherwise might lead to vulnerability. Allah is not weak or vulnerable or dependent in any way. This was relevant information, of course, particularly at that time when the Arabs were used to worshipping idols that had to be protected from harm continuously. They had to feed their idols. They had to give water to their idols. They had to protect them in shelter to make sure that their idols were not harmed. And so in that situation, Allah is telling the Muslims, don't forget you're dealing with a God who doesn't need any form of protection. Al-Qayyum means that Allah is providing rizq and sustenance. He's carefully watching every action. He's listening to every conversation. He's monitoring every thought. He's guiding every creature, every second. He has no weakness, and He's perfectly capable of anything. Of course, being informed about Allah's might and power comforted the believers before entering a battle with the most powerful Arab tribe in the region, Quraysh. Furthermore, Allah tells us everything animate and inanimate within the heavens and the earth, everything is in Allah's control. There is nothing that He is unaware of. No one can intercede in His presence except as He permits. So in the pre-Islamic period, the Quraysh might have called themselves the keepers of the Kaaba and God's special people, forbidding anyone from fighting them. But in the eyes of Allah, they had no special status. They were equal to every other creation of His. Special status was only given to those who fought for the cause of Islam and stood by the Prophet of God. They now had special status in the eyes of Allah. So the Muslims were being told, don't fear fighting the Quraysh. Don't even for a moment think that you are fighting the keepers of the Kaaba. Don't think you're fighting holy and sacred people. Because just as Allah has explained, nobody has the power to intercede in Allah's presence except as Allah permits. Allah does not say that nobody can intercede, but Quraysh can, because Quraysh are the keepers of the Kaaba. If Quraysh make a special prayer to God, then God will definitely pay attention to them. Allah doesn't say that. So He's reminding the Muslims who had spent a period in Jahiliyyat where they looked up to the Quraysh for so many years, Allah's reminding them, don't forget they are nothing. They're just people. You, on the other hand, are following the Prophet. You are following Allah. You have special status in the eyes of Allah. Allah has complete knowledge of everything that has been done in the past and all that will happen in the future to each and every creation. He is vigilant. He encompasses all the knowledge in the world which nobody else can obtain except as much as Allah permits. His throne, His kursi, extends over everything, and He feels no fatigue in guarding it. Therefore, the decisions, actions, thoughts, and feelings of every creature are in the control of Allah. Nothing escapes Him. This implies that although each person has free will and choice, the decisions he makes can only be executed by the will of Allah. And at times, his decisions are actually being guided by Allah, especially when Allah wants to show His slaves Furqan. Now let me explain that for a moment. The Muslims, for instance, when it came to the Battle of Badr, they were not commanded to go and fight at Badr. Actually, they were given a choice to either chase the caravan of Abu Sufyan or they could fight the Quraysh at Badr. And Allah had revealed that they would face victory in one of the two. Allah did not tell them which one they will face victory in. He just told them, in one of these two you will face victory. So either you can try and chase the caravan of Abu Sufyan, try and raid it and get all of the gold and all of the goods from it, or you can take your small army and go and fight the biggest army in the Arab region, Quraysh, at Badr. Now the Prophet, peace be upon him, wished for the Muslims to fight at Badr, but the believers were hesitant because they knew that they were not fully equipped. They were a very small army, and the odds were against them. They had gone out to raid a caravan. They had not gone out with the intention of battle, so they were not actually very well equipped. In the end, however, the Muslims understood and they respected the Prophet's wish. And so they marched towards Badr, even though believers with weak iman had fear and doubt about the decision. In fact, this is precisely what I was mentioning in the previous session when I was comparing the Battle of Badr to the battle between Talut and Jalut, where I told you many of the Israelites who were standing with Talut and facing the enemy, at the very last moment they started to panic. They looked at the army and they thought, okay, today there's no way that we will be able to win. And that is when those believers who had strong iman encouraged them by reminding them that Allah can do anything. So this is the exact same situation happening at the Battle of Badr, where there were some Muslims with weak iman who believed that this was a wrong decision. We should have gone to raid Abu Sufyan's caravan. There's no way we can fight and win this war at Badr. In the same way, the Quraysh decided to assemble an army and attack the Muslims, even though they had been secretly informed that Abu Sufyan's caravan was safe. Abu Sufyan's caravan at that time contained all the goods that belonged to all the chiefs of Quraysh. He had taken that caravan in order to trade. And so he was bringing back lots of gold that belonged to all the chiefs of Quraysh. So when the chiefs found out that the caravan is safe, the Muslims have not been able to raid it, and it has now come back to Makkah, there was no need to fight. But they still decided to go and fight the Muslims. Now these decisions by the Muslims and by the Quraysh were based on choice and free will. The Prophet chose to fight at Badr, the Muslims chose to follow him, the Quraysh chose to assemble an army to attack the Muslims. All of these decisions were happening based on choice and free will, but they were also under the control and guidance of Allah, because Allah wanted Badr to happen. Allah wanted Badr to be a day of Furqan. Allah wanted the Muslims and the enemies to meet each other at Badr and to have an amazing battle that would make it clear to the world whose side Allah was on. So the decision to fight that day was not a haphazard choice made at the last minute by the Muslims and the Quraysh. It was being monitored and controlled by Allah. With Allah having this kind of power, this kind of control and knowledge, the Muslims were being given the courage and strength that they needed to fight an army 3 times their size. In other words, the message being given to them was, if Allah had destined them to win, there is no might in the universe that can cause them to face defeat. So they have nothing to fear. In this way, you can appreciate the order of the verses in the surah. This throne verse, or in other words, Ayat al-Kursi, could have appeared in the beginning of Surah Baqarah. But the fact that it's appearing now, at a moment when Allah keeps reminding the Muslims, don't forget to be prepared for battle and for jihad, qital fi sabilillah, it makes so much more sense that this is the means by which Allah was encouraging the Muslims, don't fear the enemy, don't fear death. Don't run away from things like this, because it is through things like this that you will attain salvation and success in this dunya and the next. In fact, it is through this throne verse that those Muslims were getting a proper, detailed introduction of who exactly God is. Then in verse 256 onwards, Allah says, let there be no compulsion in religion. The right course has become clear from the wrong. So whoever disbelieves in Taghut and believes in Allah has grasped the most trustworthy handhold with no break in it, and Allah is hearing and knowing. Allah is the friend of those who believe. He brings them out from darkness into the light, and those who disbelieve, their allies are Taghut. They take them out of the light into the darkness. Those are the companions of the fire, they will abide therein forever. So after such a beautiful introduction of Allah and His powers, a clear covenant and Sharia having been explained, Allah is saying, let there be no compulsion in religion. There is no need to now force anyone in Islam. Truth and falsehood now has become so clear to every soul, and every ruh has testified to the legitimacy of Islam, that now it depends on the individual and the choice he wishes to make using the power of free will that he has been granted. Whatever path he chooses to adopt, Allah will grant him ease in that direction. If he chooses to hold on to Allah, he has selected a trustworthy handhold that will never break. No matter the difficulties or the challenges, Allah will never abandon him. No matter how many mistakes he makes, Allah will not be disappointed in him. No matter how many times he gets distracted and forgets Allah, Allah will not forget him. In contrast, if he wishes to adopt the path of evil, Taghut, then Allah will grant him ease in that direction, leading him away from light towards darkness. Just as Allah mentioned taking away the light of the extreme hypocrites and throwing them into the darkness in verse 17. In this context, Taghut refers to gods, leaders, institutions, anything that moves people away from the path of Islam, that moves them from light to darkness. Anything that inculcates false hopes, desires, love for dunya, misguiding the individual from attaining the pleasure of Allah. All of that is referred to as Taghut. So in your lives, Taghut could be anything. Anything that you feel pulls you away from Allah, pulls you away from Islam, distracts you all the time, that becomes Taghut for you. So Allah is saying, if you understand that it's distracting you from the truth, yet you are choosing to run towards it, then that's on you, that's your choice. But Allah has now made the truth so clear, He has explained Himself so well, He has mentioned the Sharia and the covenant so beautifully, there can be no doubt left in anyone's mind. What is the correct path and what is the wrong path? So the Quran then shifts to briefly describing 3 events that took place with the messengers of God. Now, of course, although the connection with the verses of Ayat al-Kursi do not seem apparent, a close study of these events reveals that these stories are providing practical examples of Allah being Al-Hayy and Al-Qayyum, which are the main traits mentioned in Ayat al-Kursi. So what exactly are these stories? In verse 258, Allah says, have you not considered the one who argued with Ibrahim about his Lord, merely because Allah had given him kingship? When Ibrahim said, my Lord is the one who gives life and causes death, he said, I give life and cause death. Ibrahim said, indeed, Allah brings up the sun from the east, so bring it up from the west. So the disbeliever was overwhelmed and astonished, and Allah does not guide the wrongdoing people. So this first story in verse 258 is addressing a debate that occurred between Ibrahim a.s. and a king. It is believed that Ibrahim a.s. started his journey of prophethood in the city of Ur, which is located in present-day Iraq. And at that time there was a king presiding whose name was Nimrod or Namrud. The nation of Ibrahim a.s. used to worship idols in addition to worshipping the king, who also considered himself as a god. During the dispute, Ibrahim a.s. argued that his God was the one that gave life and death. But Nimrod refuted the claim, and he suggested that no, he was the one who gives life and death. Now, surprisingly, you'll notice Ibrahim a.s., he does not negate the king. He does not tell the king, no, you're wrong. You are not the one who gives life and death, it is God. He simply changes his argument to the rising of the sun. The question is why? God, in his infinite wisdom and knowledge, understood that continuing this argument regarding life and death is futile. Because Nimrod believed that he granted life and death, and he believed this because he reserved the right to take someone's life or save it. For example, being a king, if he decided to execute someone on the spot, he believed that he has granted that person death. And if he chooses to save someone from execution, he believes he has granted that person life. Now, arguing that no, Nimrod, this is not you who's giving life and death. Everyone has a fixed period of time on this earth determined by Allah. Death can only come if Allah wills. This would be hard for the king and his people to understand. The king would say, no, I have excused this person from execution, so I have given him life. And I have chosen to execute this other person, so I have given him death. He would not understand that it's happening only with the will of Allah. So a compelling argument would require understanding the mindset of the king. So Allah commanded Ibrahim a.s., he guided Ibrahim a.s. to provide the king with a simple challenge. The sun rises from the east every day, which the Prophet claimed to be the work of Allah. And of course, the Prophet knew that as soon as he says this, the king would say, no, I'm the one who's in control. I'm the one who causes the sun to rise from the east. Therefore, Nimrod was asked to provide a demonstration of his powers, which confused him. Ibrahim a.s. told him, if the sun rising from the east was entirely in control of the king, then he should make it rise from the west. Now, this challenge reflects the beauty of Allah's wisdom and knowledge. He understands the thoughts and the mindset of each and every individual, and with that infinite knowledge, he guides his slaves in the best possible way, ensuring that the enemies of Islam face defeat. Again, an example of Al-Hayy Al-Qayyum. Then in verse 259, Allah gives another example. Allah says, or consider the example as the one who passed by a township which had fallen into ruin. He said, how will Allah bring this to life after its death? So Allah caused him to die for 100 years. Then he revived him, and he said, how long have you remained? The man said, I have remained a day or part of a day. He said, rather you have remained 100 years. Look at your food and your drink. It has not changed with time. And look at your donkey, and we will make you a sign for the people. And look at the bones of this donkey, how we raised them, and then we covered them with flesh. And when it became clear to him, he said, I know that Allah is over all things competent. Now, this second incident describes an event that occurred with the ancient Israelites, where a prophet was passing by a town that was completely destroyed, and out of anguish and shock, he questioned how Allah will ever be able to give life to this city again. Instantly, Allah gave that prophet death for 100 years, raised him up again. On being informed that he had actually been given death for 100 years, yet his food and drink showed no sign of aging while his donkey had been reduced to bones, the prophet was shown a miracle. His donkey was given life right before his eyes, so that it may be a sign of Allah's infinite power and capabilities. Now, some scholars claim that the prophet who is being referred to is Hazrat Uzair or Ezra. Others suggest it's Prophet Irmiya or Jeremiah, who is mentioned in the Torah. But regardless of who the prophet is, the city is believed to be Jerusalem, that was in a state of ruin because Allah sent wrath upon the Israelites through Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylonia, who killed approximately 600,000 Israelites and took many back as captives and burnt the whole city down, including the Solomon's temple. If you remember, I mentioned previously that Nebuchadnezzar attacked the kingdom of Judah, which was basically in the south, and this was an azab that was sent by Allah because the Israelites started to practice magic. So Nebuchadnezzar came, he attacked the south, he destroyed the Solomon's temple, he killed many Israelites, took back many as captives, but completely demolished the entire city. So the miracle being shown helped to reassure the Prophet that Allah could accomplish anything, including resurrecting the city of Jerusalem once again. Life and death is completely in Allah's control. While He chose the donkey to die and decompose, He chose the food to remain fresh, and He chose the Prophet to remain alive despite not eating or drinking anything for 100 years. Similarly, by giving life to a dead animal, Allah proved that He can also give back life to a dead city. So when an entity so powerful is on the side of the believers, why should any Muslim fear anything at all except Allah? Again, you can see an example of Allah being Al-Hayy and Al-Qayyum. Then third example is in verse 260, where Allah says, and mention when Ibrahim said, my Lord, show me how you give life to the dead. Allah said, have you not believed? He said, yes, but I ask only that my heart may be satisfied. Allah said, take 4 birds and commit them to yourself. Then, after slaughtering them, put on each hill a portion of them. Then call them, they will come flying to you in haste. And know that Allah is exalted in might and wise. Now, this final incident refers to a time when Ibrahim a.s. requested Allah to show him how Allah gives life to the dead. So he was told to take 4 birds, train them, slaughter them, distribute their portions on different hills, and then call out to them. Upon doing this, the 4 birds were given life again. They came flying back to Ibrahim a.s. as they had always been trained to do. More importantly, verse 260 makes it clear that the reason for such a request made by Ibrahim a.s. was not because he had doubts in Allah's ability to give life. It's not that he was in shock like Uzair a.s., in other words, the story mentioned in verse 259. The reason Ibrahim a.s. was asking for a miracle is that sometimes, given the challenges faced by the messengers of God in their mission of spreading religion, life can become so difficult because there are so many impediments, so many obstacles, so much hardship and tests, that prophets at that time ask Allah to show them a miracle. Because don't forget, prophets are basically human beings. They get exhausted and tired at times as well. And we know that the tests that the prophets had to face were tests unlike any other humans had to face. So at times when their struggles became too much for them to bear, they would request Allah to show them a miracle. Seeing a miracle would help to regain their strength and help them to endure the hardships of their journey again. It was like it would rejuvenate their soul. Suddenly, it would give a boost of Iman once again to their hearts, and it would give them the courage and the energy and the strength that they needed to continue on with their mission. Therefore, yet again, through this miracle, you can see a practical example of Allah being Al-Hayy and Al-Qayyum. All 3 stories confirm that Allah's throne extends over everything. His knowledge and powers are beyond our comprehension. His creations depend on Him for sustenance, life, wisdom, guidance, because that is what it means to be Al-Hayy and Al-Qayyum, as mentioned in Ayat al-Kursi. He is aware of the mindset, feelings, decisions of His slaves before they are even made. Just as He understood the mindset of Ibrahim's enemy, Nimrod, He understands the mindset of the Muslims' enemy, Quraysh. Allah is not oblivious. He also has the ability of accomplishing the impossible, such as resurrecting a demolished city. So if life and death is completely in His control and nothing can happen without His will, why should the Muslims fear the enemy? Why should they believe that they will die and the enemy will succeed, eventually destroying the Islamic State of Medina? Can Allah not easily accomplish the exact opposite of what they fear? Allah even has the ability to provide the spiritual strength to His righteous believers by giving them exactly what their hearts need, just as Ibrahim's desire was to see life being given. His heart needed to see a miracle, so Allah gave it. Allah does not pass a strict command and then expect His slaves to muster the courage on their own to fulfill the command. He gives the command and then He gives the strength that His pious slaves need to help them earn Allah's pleasure. So if the Muslims fear the enemy, they should know that Allah will never abandon them. Through miracles and signs, He will show them what their hearts desire to boost their Iman and ensure that they do not run from the battlefield. Allah is not telling the Muslims that go to the battlefield and then deal with it yourself. Allah is telling them, go to the battlefield and fight, and remember, every second I am with you. I'm not like your idols who are sitting all the way in Makkah. And again, it's important for the Muslims to understand this because although they had converted to Islam, they had spent decades worshipping idols. So for many of them, they were still trying to understand who is this amazing God and how awesome are his capabilities. And therefore, through examples of these beautiful prophets, Allah is telling them how awesome and amazing he actually is. Then in verses 261 onwards, Allah says, the example of those who spend their wealth in the way of Allah is like a seed of grain which grows 7 spikes. In each spike is 100 grains, and Allah multiplies his reward for whom he wills, and Allah is all-encompassing and knowing. Those who spend their wealth in the way of Allah and then do not follow up what they have spent with reminders of it or other injury will have their reward with Allah, and there will be no fear concerning them, nor will they grieve. Kind speech and forgiveness are better than charity followed by injury, and Allah is free of need and forbearing. Now, the significant role of charity in Islam and in building the first Muslim community is again clear from the next 20 verses of this surah, which focuses on motivating the believers to spend in the cause of Allah, identifies the criteria for charity to be accepted by Allah, and introduces the concept of barakah. Allah reassures the Muslims that any wealth that they spend as charity for the sake of Allah will be returned multiple times, just as 1 grain of corn gives rise to 700 further grains. Allah is completely aware of what has been spent in his way, and he encompasses knowledge of everything. The exact amount of increase that anyone will receive for the sadaqah given is dependent on the will of Allah. He gives as much as he wills to whomsoever he wills, but you will definitely get more than what you actually gave. However, in order to receive the benefits of giving out in charity, the criteria of sadaqah has to be fulfilled, which includes, firstly, ensuring that the money is spent only to seek the pleasure of Allah, not for worldly gains. Secondly, do not follow up gifts or aid given to others with reminders so as to humiliate the person or expect some reward from them in exchange. So when you help someone, don't constantly remind them that you helped them, because that is humiliating them, and in doing so, you are canceling your reward in the eyes of Allah. Thirdly, make sure that any aid or gift given to others in need are not used as an excuse to insult or harm them. Being kind to others and covering up their faults is better and more acceptable in the eyes of Allah than giving charity followed by injury. Allah continuously emphasizes He is not in need of anyone's charity. The Almighty is perfectly capable of helping His slaves Himself. The purpose of charity is designed to benefit those who have wealth, so that they may gain the blessings and forgiveness of Allah, they may cleanse their soul, inculcate empathy, love for mankind, and so that they may free themselves from greed of accumulating wealth and have barakah in their wealth. Therefore, the act of distributing and sharing wealth in Islam is supposed to benefit the rich and the poor. That is the whole point. So if people start to give more to the poor, but they end up insulting them after giving it to them, they end up constantly reminding them, or they use that help in order to harm them in some way, then that is not only charity which will not be accepted, but they will be held severely accountable for that behavior on the Day of Judgment. Allah will not let it go. Allah does not take it lightly when you insult a fellow slave of His just because that slave is poor. When you take advantage of someone's poverty in order to insult them, harm them, humiliate them, then that is something that Allah takes very seriously. So that is what Allah's reminder is to the Muslims. Give charity, give as much as you can, but be very careful about how you're giving it. Because the entire reason you're giving it is not because you're doing Allah a favor. It's not because you're doing those poor people a favor. You're doing it to help yourself. And if you're going to end up insulting and injuring and humiliating other people, you're actually making your taqwa level worse. So inshallah, we'll stop over here, continue on with the next verses in the next session. Do take a moment to reflect on the beauty of the throne verse. The fact that at that moment it was designed to help the Muslims who had to fight in battle, but it's equally important for us today when we are consumed with so much fear when it comes to jihad. We are terrified of people leaving us. We are terrified of society judging us. We are terrified to speak up for what is just and for what is right because we are so scared of the consequences. So remind yourself of who exactly God is, how awesome and how beautiful and how amazing and powerful He is, because that will give you the courage to stand up against those who you are terrified of. It's actually something that we all need because at times we all forget how exactly powerful Allah is. We start to focus so much on dunya and society and on rich people that we start to think that they are so powerful that they can harm us, while forgetting that ultimate power, wisdom, knowledge, strength, it's all in the hands of Allah. So do not allow yourself to be easily deluded. If you ever get consumed by fear of different things in this world that stop you from doing jihad, recite the throne verse and just reflect on it for a moment. Assalamu alaikum.